Okay, we'll go ahead and get started. I want to introduce Virg Parks, who is a alto.
No, soprano.
Soprano. I know this stuff. So thank you for volunteering to do your story today. So if everybody will give her your undivided attention. Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you. Thanks, everybody. Okay, so yes, I am terrified. And I'm going to mention up front something that I realized I didn't include anywhere, is that I do have fibromyalgia. It started years ago, decades ago, literally, initially diagnosed as chronic fatigue syndrome. My ACT UP friends said it was just lesbian virus envy. And anyway, but my motto is that the only way to keep moving is to keep moving. So there are those days where I'm like, I'm in pain, I don't want to go to the gym. Do I really have to go to the gym? Okay, I'm going to go to the gym. So let me address the tardiness up front. I was born almost a month late. I was breech, and I'm still catching up. I've got it down to about 15 minutes. And I was born to a 5-year-old brother and a 12-year-old sibling. They were responsible for me not walking until I was 2. Mom took me to an orthopedist who said, there's nothing wrong with this child except that she's smart, manipulative, and stubborn. One of my earliest memories is my brother reading to me on the floor in his bedroom. He actually would come home every day and teach me whatever he had learned in school that day, which was awesome until I started school and informed the teacher that I didn't really need to pay attention to the lesson because I already know this stuff. I'm just going to read my book, okay? That was not okay. Another early memory that it didn't really register until much later in life is that my parents had a lot of black friends. And today that would be normal, but in 1962 Houston, Texas, not so normal. We also went to a lot of parades and picnics with these black friends. Much later, my brother informed me that the parades and picnics were actually marches and rallies, but I just knew that it was a parade, and I felt like I was the queen of the parade. And then we stopped going, well, at least Dad stopped taking us, when the Klan showed up in full force and regalia. And I said, oh, those were the scary guys in white. Yeah, scary guys in white. The sounds of adults having arguments and laughing was my lullaby because my parents were civil rights organizers. Dad was also a union organizer. So lots of meetings happened at our house. And we were also kind of the party house. So lots of meetings and lots of parties. I learned solidarity from my dad when his union went on strike. Well, his shop went on strike to support another shop. They were trying to get medical benefits, so Dad called a family meeting. It was October. He said, it's going to be a really lean Christmas because I'm going to have to take off work for a while. And so everybody had to do their part. And he explained that they were doing that because if they needed other workers to stand up for them, they expected them to be there, and that's how solidarity works. And so my brother had just got his learner's permit. Mom didn't drive, but she was really good at sitting in the front seat and pretending she knew how to drive. And so our job was to take sandwiches and coffee to the guys that were on the picket line. And so my parents kind of groomed me to be an activist, actually. In middle school, the year I started middle school was also the year that the courts had forced Houston to integrate the schools. So they started doing busing, and I did not have to get bused anywhere, but kids came to my school. And I kind of understood racism a bit. I understood it pragmatically, but when that happened, I saw it on the faces of my neighbors. When they greeted the students who were coming to my school with sticks and rocks and bottles and profanity. And I couldn't understand it because I had been in their house. I had played with their children. They had been to parties at my house. And here they were being so cruel to children. In high school, my boredom with school kind of continued. And I would typically skip an English class because I felt like I really wasn't learning anything there. And so I was sent to the principal's office. He was like, Virginia, what am I going to do with you? Because I was in the Honor Society. I was in the top 10% of my class. I was in the debate team, etc. I can't kick you out of school. And I said, well, do what you got to do. And so he sent me to the English class that was for the juvenile delinquents. And it was taught by a gay man. My people, I had found my people. And when a couple of our classmates died in a terrible car wreck, Mr. Delaney taught us how to process grief through writing. So we wrote lots and lots and lots of really, really sad poems. My 21st birthday, my uncle gave me a set of wine glasses, and my mother gave me a lecture about alcoholism. And she said, since you're going to start drinking soon, she didn't know I started drinking like 3 years before, you should know that you come from a long line of alcoholics and drug addicts. And so you need to be careful. So thanks to Mom, I did not try heroin when it was offered to me. But much of the late 70s and early 80s was kind of a blur because I pretty much tried everything else. When about the time that they started talking about that gay cancer was when I moved to Austin and my best friend John moved to New York City, the belly of the beast. And I fell in love with a woman, and we were living the happy domesticated dyke life in Austin. And then I got a phone call from my friend saying, I have it. And he didn't need to tell me what it was. I dove into fighting HIV in Austin. I couldn't save him, but maybe I could save somebody else. So I spent a lot of time talking, doing public speaking and talking about how to not get HIV. So I don't know why I'm so anxious here, because I have talked about penises and vaginas to like groups of 200. And I also took care of people that were sick and dying, because to be honest, the healthcare system then wasn't interested in taking care of them. So we had to take care of our own, as you guys know. One day, one of the women that I worked with, one of the clients I worked with, gave me a flyer. She said, there's this organization that's starting up, and I'm angry, but I'm too sick to go. And you're more angry than I am, and you really need to process that shit. And so the organization that was starting was ACT UP. Was starting a chapter in Austin. So in Austin, we really kind of spent a lot of our time banging our heads against homophobic walls. You know, every single legislative session, there was somebody proposing that they quarantine all the people with HIV and all of this crazy stuff. And, you know, we were doing a lot of actions and putting out fires, but we weren't really making progress. And so a friend of mine invited me to go on vacation with her and her son. They were driving out the country, and I lost my timer. Okay, so where's Mo? Because Mo's gonna flag me. Okay, so they said, well, it doesn't cost any extra. Why don't you drive out with us? They stopped in Southern California for a while and dropped me off at the airport because I was heading to San Francisco, where another ACT UP activist and ex-girlfriend lived at the time. And so I showed up at her house, and she handed me a leather jacket and a motorcycle helmet and said, "Come on, we're late." And of course, late. And so that was my first ACT UP Golden Gate meeting. And it was amazing. Like, these people were actually making progress. They were doing report backs about how they were meeting with pharmaceutical reps and on these protocol teams and talking to the FDA and the NIH and all of this stuff. And then in the middle of it, they interrupted because they needed to do a report back from the people who were at the International AIDS Conference. That's when I kind of had an activist orgasm. And 3 months later, I had moved to San Francisco. ACT UP Golden Gate was, we were sort of the science nerds of ACT UP. We did actions, but we much preferred to sit at tables and meet with researchers than march in the streets, but sometimes we had to do the latter. These guys were my brothers and sisters, and so they were my family, they were my mentors, they were my friends, they were my dearly beloveds. As many of you know, there were weeks when we didn't have weeks where somebody didn't die. You know, every week somebody was dying. And I remember vividly one week I walked from the train station at Market and Castro up to the ACT UP office at 18th Street. And I got there and I thought, well, something's really weird here. Something was weird about my commute today. And it was because I did not see a single young man who looked like he was dying. There were no walkers. And this was, I guess, like 96-ish. It was after the protease inhibitors were being commonly used. And I just sat on the steps and I sobbed. I got really good at finding quiet, secret places to cry because my job was to take care of everybody else. And so I cried in showers, I cried in dark theaters. This was one of the few times that I openly just sobbed for anybody to see. I focused my activist efforts on pediatrics because nobody else was doing it at the time. And so kind of my favorite, so I'm going to jump forward a bit. I inevitably got onto something called the Community Constituency Group of the AIDS Clinical Trials Group. The ACTG was a program under NIAID. Director Fauci was the director of it. And so one day they had an executive meeting. This was after the study where they used AZT to help prevent prenatal transmission. And so it was a big deal. It was a successful study. So they were having this big meeting, and Tony Fauci was there, and they were all so excited, and they were announcing that they were going to change the budget because they had limited funds, and they wanted to focus all of the budget on preventing prenatal transmission. Excuse me, what about the kids that are already here? Well, Virg, we can't take care of everybody, and we've got to make difficult decisions. And I said, so they're in collateral damage, right? You're going to just write them off and let them die. And they were like, well, it's not like that. And I said, okay, fine, we're done. And then at the end, I went up and introduced myself to Tony Fauci. He is really short. And he agreed with that decision. He thought it was a good plan. And I said, I don't agree with you, and my friends aren't going to agree with you, and we're not going to let you do this. And so I went and met with the parents and other activists that were involved in pediatrics, and we devised an action. Remember, we did not have cell phones at the time. We had fax machines. Some people had internet access. But we did have FedEx, and we had an all-night copy shop. So, and like most parents, everybody had a photo in their wallet of their child, even the ones that were already dead. Because, you don't stop being a parent when your child dies, right? And so we made flyers, and on one side it was a picture of a child, and on the other side explained what their plans were, and our objections to it. And some of the photos said, the ACTG failed to save this child. Some of the photos said, will the ACTG bother to save this one? And so we took them to the all-night photo shop, and the guy, he said, you guys need some posters of these. This is amazing. You need posters. And we said, well, we pulled together all the money that we have, and we can't afford posters. Like, well, what do they cost? And he said, and he looked around, he was like, they're $0. And so he made posters. Every morning of the meeting, and these were meetings that were like a week long. So every morning there was a plenary session in the main ballroom. There was a long hallway that led to that ballroom, and there was only one way out. And so when the plenary session let out, we were there waiting for the other activists and all the researchers, and it was everybody, pediatric research, adult researchers, everybody. And we were handing out flyers to people as they came out, and as they walked down the hallway, they were greeted with these posters of smiling, happy children. First, there were the dead children, and then there were the ones that were still alive. And needless to say, there was a lot of pressure put on the pediatric ACTG. They did not change their agenda. They continued to pursue treatments for children. And when I started doing that work, they had nothing, at least nothing that was formulated for children. By the time I walked away from it, they had 4 different antiretrovirals. And and so that was when I met Tony Fauci. And so as I was doing this work, and they were doing more, trying to prevent seroconversion in newborns and stuff like that, they were having difficulty recruiting women to studies. And nobody could understand because the FDA had lifted the ban. Women were allowed to participate. And they said, why aren't they participating? And I said, because straight women are not gay men. And they have different obligations, they've got different lives, they've got different motivations. One of the researchers said, the only language that most of us understand is data, so you need to do a study. So I did a survey of HIV positive women asking what would motivate them to participate in in clinical research. We were gearing up for the international conference in Vancouver. I had already gone to the previous one in Berlin, and actually had chaired a couple of sessions. And then the one in Vancouver, the organizer said, well, if you guys present a study to us, even if we don't accept it for presentation, we'll go ahead and let you come for free. And I said, awesome. So we all presented something. Mine, I presented as a poster so that I wouldn't have to do this. And they selected it for oral presentation. I'm like, I hate you. But what I learned from this, and hopefully some of the researchers learned, is that sure, the women wanted some funding. They wanted to be compensated for their time and trouble. They needed bus fare, they needed childcare, etc. But they also needed the study explained to them in a language that they understood. They needed to know how their participation would contribute to fighting AIDS. They also needed to be treated with respect, which unfortunately they often were not. I had left space for them to say whatever they wanted to say, and I was surprised I shouldn't have been. How many of them simply said thank you for asking because no one ever has? And so that was awesome. And then I was kind of, I guess what you would call, I never didn't think of it as such, but I was what they would call a high-level treatment activist. I was kind of, I presented before the FDA a couple of times. Was on a first-name basis with a lot of high-level researchers. I helped design protocols, that kind of stuff, all that nerdy stuff. And sometimes I marched in the streets. A good rowdy protest is so cathartic. I forgot to mention that conference in Vancouver, that was when I slept with Rachel Maddow. And, but we only slept. And we also got kicked out of a bathroom together in Sacramento. We were doing some lobbying, and young baby dyke Rachel Maddow, of course, when she dressed up, it was a man's suit. And so this woman was freaking out because she thought there was a man in the bathroom. And so Rachel and I were running down the hallways just giggling. And so after the experience presenting that data, which was amazing, sort of not so much the presentation, that was scary, but seeing the numbers, seeing the ones and zeros turn into actual information, and something tangible that I could take back to the researchers and say, this is why women aren't signing up, and you need to invest some time and energy into what they ask for. And so after that, I decided that I was on track to becoming a behavioral scientist. A lot of researchers were writing letters of recommendation. I was going to go to UCSF. It was all planned out. And then my mom developed Alzheimer's, which my siblings were not picking up on. I could tell from 3,000 miles away that something wasn't right. And I decided the only way to take care of Mom was to go home and take care of Mom. And so I did that. And I was doing an AmeriCorps internship, and the social workers at the VA, I was working with homeless veterans, and the social workers at the VA said, "You're a social worker." And I was like, "No, I'm not." No, I'm not. And they're like, "Yeah, you're a social worker." I was like, "No, you're wrong." And so I did end up going and getting my master's in social work. Worked a lot with unhoused people. I used to joke that that guy, the raging alcoholic that's sleeping under the bridge, that's my guy. And then I also worked in politics a bit. Of the two, trust me, it's politics that sucked the life out of me. Sometimes working with homeless people was depressing and sad, but politics, they just chew you up and spit you out. So those people this summer, that young person that's going to knock on your door and ask you for your plan to go vote, please be nice to them. Give them a bottle of water, because politics sucks. And I also even worked in the Texas legislature one session. That was really fun. I was blessed to be able to see our first Black president inaugurated. That was really cool. All of DC was celebrating. And so I bounced between politics and various social work, case management jobs. Lived in Philly for a while, and then back in Houston, and was had ended my job with the Democratic Party, and I was unemployed. But recently they had some court challenges, had reopened the abortion clinics in Texas, or at least most of them. And so Houston Women's Clinic, which was the 4th busiest abortion clinic in the entire United States, had reopened, and they needed clinic escorts. And so I wasn't working at the time. I said, what the heck, I'm going to volunteer. So I went down there, I donned the rainbow vest, and escorted patients to and from the appointment. So one time, I was on the assignment of escorting the sedated patients from the door to their car. And every single patient was saying, "Everybody here is so nice. You're so nice. Everybody here is so nice." And so I went to the woman who organized the volunteers, and I said, "Do they ever need social workers here?" And she's like, "You're a social worker and you're unemployed, and what the heck?" So she took me in. I met the clinic manager that day. I interviewed a few days later, started working the next week. And so I was there for 7 years, loved the job, loved it. People assumed that I was depressing. It was not. It was really empowering. A lot of the people I talked to ended up leaving with a prescription for prenatal vitamins and an OB recommendation. So not only was I blessed to help women and other people with uteruses, because we also saw patients that were trans and non-binary, but I got to help them empower themselves. And often I was the person who was also telling them that, like, your boyfriend doesn't have the right to tell you to be here. Your husband doesn't have the right to force you to be here. That's what Roe versus Wade was about, is that it was the patient's decision. And so I joke that I would probably be more likely to be shot in the parking lot by a disgruntled boyfriend than one of the protesters. Speaking of the protesters, I was kind of a troublemaker there too. We weren't supposed to acknowledge them, but whenever they went, and most of the time I didn't, but I loved when they would say, "Do you know Jesus?" And my response would be like, "Oh my God, yes, I do know him. He's one of my best friends. Just a minute, let me go grab him." And I'd go grab one of the volunteers and pull them over and say, "This is Jesus right here, incarnate. Yes, I know Jesus." The church that I attended at the time, Resurrection MCC in Houston, the pastor even asked me to do an about ourselves, talk about that in church. So that was the church that I attended. Yeah, they were kind of progressive, and so I talked about how I told that story. And how, God was with me every single day. And Jesus was there too, but he was outside in the parking lot wearing a rainbow vest. And it was funny because so many people came up to me afterwards and they were like, "I was holding it together until you said Jesus was wearing a rainbow vest." And so that was fun. So then of course the Dobbs decision came, and the job that I loved so much, the job that I expected to retire from, was gone. I was offered a job with another organization here, but I had to move to Colorado. And they're doing awesome work. It wasn't a good fit for me. It just wasn't a good fit. We'll leave it at that. But it got me to Colorado. And so that thing is, one day in church, I had done a silent prayer, and I said, "So, God, should I take this job? This is insane. Why am I planning another move to another state? And I'm 64 years old. What am I doing? Should I do this?" God said, "Yes, you should do this." And so I moved here. The job ended, and I was like, "What the hell, God?" So I started applying. I thought, well, I'm going to go back to my social work beginnings, because there's a lot of homeless people in Denver. Did you know that? And so I applied for a lot of jobs. My first interview was, I think, 4 days after I got fired. And my second interview was the next week, and then I started working, 2 or 3 weeks later. And so now I work with unhoused families, and we are a transitional program. We provide them with a safe and stable place to be while they get back on their feet. And then I help them find new housing, something that they can sustain on their own. And I'm happy to say that next week, 3 of my families, 3 of them, are moving out. And that's that's as good as it gets. I'm on time mode. Do I have time for the abbreviated list of famous people I've met? Sure. Okay, so you know about Tony Fauci, you know about Rachel Maddow. I had written it down, but I threw that out. I met Prince when it was his first album tour. I had a part-time job with a record company, and it was his first album. He was just such a dear, sweet, sweet boy. I can't tell you how sweet he was. Oh my God, I just wanted to grab him and hug him. And very, very shy, very quiet, very polite. God, calling everyone sir and ma'am. We were like, you don't have to. He was like, yes, I do. So, yeah, the total opposite of what he was on stage. I also met Bruce Springsteen. Now, Bruce, I had to stand outside in the rain for 4 hours, but I got a hug. Let's see, other people I've met. Oh, I mentioned the Dianne Feinstein. If you ever read a book about the industrial military complex, and there's something about how Virg Park chased Dianne Feinstein out of her office. Not true. She stormed out on her own accord. I did not chase her. So chasing would involve me following after her. I did not follow after her. And it was because I simply asked, I said, okay, before we start mandatorily testing every pregnant woman, could we try a little education? Because studies have shown if you talk to them about the importance of getting tested, they will get tested. And you don't have to force them to do it. And she's like, and how are we going to pay for that? And her meeting room had, because she was really, really pro-military. So around the wall, there were all these like models of different weapons of war. And I said, one of those right there should do it. And that was when she's like, you just want everything. And I was like, yeah, I do want everything. Anyway, so I met Dianne Feinstein. That wasn't pretty. But I also met Nancy Pelosi. I met some of her family members. I met Beto O'Rourke. Let me say this, politicians. I know a lot of politicians. That's the only people that are coming to mind right now. There are more. One time I made a list and there was like 40. And of course, like all of the famous AIDS activists. So I'm friends with Peter Staley. I've met Larry Kramer. But the people that really stick in my brain and my heart the most were my brothers. Were my friends that I knew. I had a dream one time and I wrote a poem about it. Very, very quick. I had a dream. I had a dream about my friends. I had a dream about my friends as gray-haired queers, remembering our Holocaust like tattooed Jews might remember theirs. I used to fear growing old, wary of my youthful soul and an elderly package. But now this is the fear. This is the fear that stalks my dreams. The fear, the monster I cannot escape, is that we might not grow old. We might not grow old together. But I had a dream. And so, thankfully,